But before we get into this video, I just wanted to let you guys know that I had a very, very special guest join me for this. He's been an inspiration to the channel since the beginning. Some of you may know him, some of you might not. But I'll go ahead and tell you, once you listen to him, you'll be hooked. Now let's begin. Let me preface this with the fact that my family has been in the Ozarks of Missouri, Arkansas since before the Civil War. It is a weird and wonderful place with a lot of characters living in it. We're very rarely scared running through these woods, but it is probably due to the fact that we know these weird woods and the oddballs who live in it. Our version of missing 411 is some yahoo getting drunk off of green whiskey and passing out under a tree. Usually for like a day or something, leaving a bootleg still set up in a cave. Yes, there was an elderly woman that was arrested a couple of years ago for running a moonshine operation. Meth changed a lot of people here. But even if you run into somebody that's cooking it in the woods, which wet weather creek beds and Mountain Dew are their favorite, just greet them and continue on your way, because they'll be gone within half a day. In the early 80s, my brother, Steve, age 16, went to northern Missouri, the Flatlands, with his best friend, Mike, to visit his relatives, who were also farmers. We grew up to be rather independent. Driving a car by age 12 was kind of the status among country kids. So aside from being required to go to church, we were pretty much allowed to do whatever we really wanted to. And it sounded like it was no different over there with them. They had a lot of fun, goofing around, and had great stories when they came back. Told me what they did. But one story sticks out in my mind. One late night, they were in my brother's old hot rod Mustang, driving down a long stretch of narrow dirt road on a farm country. We live in the Rocky Hills. When the road became a very tight one-way, with the fence line so overgrown that the trees were a canopy over the road. It can be kind of odd to see some of those overgrown roads in that area, because fertile flatlands are precious commodities. He said they were creeping along because they didn't want to run into a dead end and tear up the car. Headlights were definitely not the same as now, and something just seemed funky. Along the lane, they passed a drive with chained up wire hog panels as a gate. In the moonlight, they could see an old 2-story farmhouse that had collapsed in on itself, with a traditional big barn beside it, looking like it was going to do the same thing at any time. There wasn't a pole light or anything like that most people have around, only the moonlight. They continued on as the road seemed to get even more overgrown, talking about whether they should attempt to back up about half a mile to that farmer's driveway and turn around. Finally, they could see ahead a little bit, that the road opened up a little bit to some sort of clearing. And as they pulled into it, the road suddenly ended at an old iron gate with a makeshift sign reading cemetery. They were at a graveyard. By this time, they had spooked themselves out. They were somewhat lost and had just creeped down some overgrown road to end up in a graveyard in the middle of the night. Steve managed to turn the car around to head back, going a little more quickly than before. As they started nearing the driveway to that rundown farm, they could just make out something very tall and glowing white in the driveway of that old place. As the headlights hit the drive in the apparition, they realized it was a ghostly white, giant old man around 6'4", standing by the side of the road, wearing only pants and no shoes, just calmly waving at them. Still nary a light, but the moon. They hightailed it out of there, and both could have cared less if he scratched up his car. He told us that over 30 years ago, and I've never forgotten it.
This happened to me over the weekend during a hunting trip. I spent last night trying to Google and figure out what the heck I saw. I haven't found anything that doesn't seem like conspiracy craziness, so I'm open to any suggestions. A family friend has a few hundred acres in Tennessee. Once a year, my dad, uncle, and myself, and the guys in the family that own the land go on a week-long hunting trip. They have a cabin and a trailer tucked away at the edge of the mountain that we stay at during the week. There is no running water, and we use a generator for lights during the evening. Phone service is non-existent out there. The nearest town is Murphy, Tennessee, which is about 50 minutes away by car. Typically, we get out to tree stands/ground blinds at around 4 a.m., and then come back to the camp around 9ish, grab something to eat and nap, and then head back to hunt until sundown. All week, my uncle and I hunted the same plot. It was on the east side of the property and took about 20 minutes by four-wheeler. We would park the four-wheeler in this big clearing, and then the ground blind I was hunting from is another 15 minutes or so by foot. It's a rough 15 minutes, too. I basically walk along this ridge line on the side of the mountain, and the blind is set just inside the underbrush of a tree line that overlooks an opening at the start of a river. My uncle was hunting in a blind that was a little closer walk and probably 30 minutes away from me. We hunted the same spot Sunday through Thursday. Thursday evening, we were all drinking beer and hanging out by the fire. My uncle, having not seen anything all week, wanted to go to the plot my dad was hunting. It was a 30-minute walk from the camp. You don't even need a four-wheeler to get there. I had killed a deer the first afternoon there and seen a bunch of does that evening right before sunset, so I wanted to stay where I was. So Friday morning after we hunted, I helped him pack up his blind and ride it out to the plot that my dad had been on, and helped him get set up for that evening. I took the four-wheeler by myself that afternoon and continued hunting the same ground blind. Same thing as I had done all week. Everything was fine. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until Saturday morning. I had gone out by myself again that morning and had watched a bunch of deer that crept up right before the sun started coming up. They were a bit further than I wanted to shoot, and when they got closer to the edge of the river, they weren't big enough or were too young for me to justify shooting. I watched them until they retreated back into the woods, and at this point, it's probably 8:30 a.m. or so, and the sun is fully up. Now, this is an embarrassing one for me, but oh well. Having spent almost an entire week packed in this trailer with two other guys and no privacy, I decided that I was going to have a little fun before I went back to the camp. Every hunter has done it. I don't care if you admit to it or not. Now, I'm sitting there doing my thing, and even though nobody ever walks up while you're hunting out there, I'm still on high alert, making sure that I don't get caught by one of the guys while I'm doing this. I'm laid back in this chair inside of the blind, basically one eye looking in front of me, and every now and again peeking behind me through the mesh to make sure that no one's coming. That's when I started hearing crunching. I knew it was people's footsteps, and I could tell that it was more than one person. It was to my right, and the mesh of my ground blind and underbrush kept me from being able to see who it was. I calmly got myself ready, and quietly leaned up so that when my uncle or whoever it was came up, I could act like I was just sitting there hunting. Keep in mind, we are so far out in the sticks that it never even occurred to me that it could be anybody other than someone that I was hunting with. I listened to them walking, and finally, I slowly stood up and poked my head through the blind and peeked over the underbrush. It was 4 people walking towards the river in a line. They were wearing these black cloak-looking clothes, like something they wear in Harry Potter, with these furry hats that covered most of their faces. It looked like some weird cult, but the guy in the back of the line was completely naked. He looked disgusting. His hair was curly and way too long, and he had a big beard that looked nasty, like it had a bunch of leaves and stuff in it. I'm bundled up with hand warmers in my pockets because it's like 25 to 30 degrees out. This guy had to be freezing. No shoes either. This is thick underbrush that we're talking about walking through. Rocks jutting up from the ground and stuff. No sane person is out there barefoot, much less completely naked. The guy had to be 115 pounds too, just completely unhealthy looking, like these people that had been keeping him prisoner or something. The sight of these guys was so unnerving to me. that I was still standing there frozen in an awkward half stand, half bent over position, with my head out of the blind watching them, before it clicked with me that I needed to slowly sit down. At that point, they had passed the point of the blind where I couldn't see them, and were walking with their backs to me, towards the river. I slowly sat down, and put my rifle in my lap, and watched them all step ankle deep into the river. They were facing side profile away from me, towards the woods. And I could see two of the clothed people moving around the naked guy, and one of them was standing still, holding their arm out in front of them. I got the nerve to look through my scope at them, and it looked like two of them were washing the guy with the river water, and the other one holding their arm out like a chain or something. The one holding the chain was talking, but way too far for me to hear any of it. After a few minutes, the two doing the washing stopped, and all three of them held hands around the naked guy and started moving in a circle around him while he just stood there staring ahead. They did this for at least 5 minutes. That doesn't seem that long of a time, but 5 whole minutes of watching whatever the heck that was seemed like a lifetime. Something of note that clicked with me last night. Whatever they were doing seemed time-based. My watch beeped at 9 o'clock and nearly gave me a heart attack. No way that they could hear it, but in my head, I was picturing them all turning and looking at me. But right after my watch beeped, they stopped a few seconds later, at 9 on the dot. The 3 clothed people stepped back in a line in front of the naked guy, and they walked back the way they came, exactly like they came in. None of them talked or broke the line while they were walking. It was terrifying because the way out for them was the first time I could truly have been in their line of sight. They never saw me though, and I watched them once they passed my head back up the mountain from where I assumed they originally came from. I waited for 30 minutes or so and booked it out of there fast.
I've had a few unsettling experiences in the woods, but this is questionably the strangest one. I've been mulling it over for a few years now, and I still can't come up with a rational explanation. A few details have been changed to protect my identity, but the story is 100% true. I apologize for how long it is, by the way. In 2018, my partner and I drove up to a national forest in Oregon for a day to hike in the early summer. The area was somewhat remote, but nothing too isolated. Hiking is huge in the Pacific Northwest, so there are plenty of people that are on these trails at any given time, especially during the peak season. Because of this, we chose a less popular trail in the hopes that we would be getting some alone time. It was approximately a 6-mile out and back. It's a moderate difficulty of a hike, with a waterfall at the end. It followed a river and didn't intersect with any other trails. Simple enough, right? We were both experienced hikers in a good physical condition, so we had no reason to think that we needed anything but day packs, with a couple of liters of water and sandwiches. Getting back before dark should have been a piece of cake. We set out sometime after noon. At first we took it slow and meandered around the riverbank for a few minutes. I found a cool-looking animal bone, and we mused over what it might be. It was clearly a vertebrae from a large mammal, so we guessed it might have been just maybe a deer bone. Because I'm a little morbid, and I collect strange things of nature. I put it in my backpack. That might not have been anything to do with what happened next, but I feel like I should mention it, since it was out of the ordinary. The hike to the waterfall was beautiful. We passed a few other people that were on their way back to the trailhead. But for the most part, we had the entire place to ourselves. We stopped a few times to look at the wildlife, or to just take some photos of flowers. I was tracking our progress on my Fitbit, so I always knew how many miles we traveled, and how much time we had before sunset. We reached the waterfall at about 3.2 miles, which matched with what the map said. I paused my watch and we settled at a large boulder to rest and eat our lunch. Another young couple was there with their dog. We said hello and then minded our own business. Here's where everything went wrong. As we packed up our stuff, prepared to leave, my partner, Michael, slipped off of a boulder and twisted his ankle badly. The other couple heard his surprised scream as he splashed into the water, so they rushed over to help. The three of us hauled him back to the dry land and assessed his injury. None of us were doctors, but we thought that it was just a sprain. The swelling had already begun, and Michael said that his pain was serious. He could barely stand. Upon realizing this, the male half of the other couple started backing away and seemed anxious to leave. I asked him if he could go get help, but he didn't respond. Neither did his wife. They both just turned around and started booking it out of the trail with their dog trotting behind them. I called out to them in frustration, but they didn't look back. Needless to say, we didn't have cell service that deep in the woods, so we couldn't contact anyone else. We had to hike back. "It'll be okay," I said to Michael. "It's only 3 miles. You can do this." We shifted the water bottles and our modest amount of gear into my pack so we wouldn't have to carry any extra weight, and to make this an easier process. I was still tracking the hike on my Fitbit. After about 2 miles, Michael ran out of steam and we rested again. I told him to lean on me and take the weight off of his injured ankle. Even though I'm a head shorter than him, it seemed to help. "We're almost there," I said. "Just 1 more mile." Despite this setback, we were pretty high-spirited. The sun was still up and the woods were still beautiful. We made light of our predicament. Michael joked about how he can't do anything without getting hurt or breaking something, and I comforted him. We both thought the ordeal was nearly over. Eventually, I realized we'd been walking longer than expected. I assumed it only felt that way because we were moving at such a slow pace. But when I checked my watch and saw that we'd gone further than a mile, I started to worry. We were at 6.6 miles total. That meant we had walked back and must have made a mistake at some point. Maybe I hadn't started the tracker until we had already traveled a ways at the beginning. Regardless, the parking lot had to be around this next curve in the trail. But it wasn't. We went another half mile or so before stopping and assessing the situation. Over 7 miles total and we still weren't back. What the hell? I checked the map of our hike on the Fitbit and saw that there weren't any gaps. It was a straight line from beginning to end, with the line doubled back on itself, indicating that we were on the same route. But where was the trailhead? We talked it over and concluded that it had to be a glitch. Michael was adamant that we hadn't passed the trailhead, and we couldn't have taken a wrong turn, because there were no other trails. Plus, the scenery was all familiar. We saw things we remembered passing by on our way through to the waterfall. It was definitely the same trail, and well maintained too. A big, wide dirt track that followed the river and didn't veer off into the undergrowth. Losing the trail was impossible. At that point, we started to feel demoralized. But what could we do except for keep going? Our phone still didn't have service. Michael was in a lot of pain and struggling to put weight on his sprained ankle. It was twice the size of his other ankle. He was sweating and I was sweating. The whole situation started to feel like a nightmare. When we went another mile and still didn't reach the trailhead, we panicked. Night falls quickly in the forest, and we had a little bit of daylight left. We were almost out of water and had no rain gear or other food, and the only flashlights that we had were the ones on our phones. Of course, we cursed ourselves for not being more supplied, but we were only supposed to be out there for a few hours. It was just a short day hike, and we had no idea how it could have gone so wrong. Out of desperation, I yelled for help. We'd seen no people since that strange couple had abandoned us near the waterfall, but I was sure that we had to be close to the parking lot. That didn't mean that there was anyone there, but we were both so freaked out. I was willing to make a fool of myself, if it meant rescue. To our dismay, nobody answered. We were alone. In an attempt to get a grip, we reasoned that we had maybe really passed the trailhead that we started at. Maybe we were so focused on keeping Michael off of his bad foot that we'd simply missed it, and were hiking towards another trailhead. We were pretty sure that wasn't the case, though, even though we couldn't be certain. It seemed like the landscape had changed. We no longer recognized any of the landmarks, except for this river, and that seemed to support the theory that we'd gone too far. We knew we weren't walking in circles. That wasn't possible. Should we turn back? We mulled that over for a few minutes. If we were wrong, backtracking would guarantee spending the night in the woods. Michael couldn't deal with that ankle forever. We decided to press onward. I'm not crazy, right? I asked. That initial hike was only 3 miles. We went 3 miles to the waterfall. Yes, Michael agreed. The entire hike was only supposed to be a little bit over 6 miles out and back. We've walked a lot farther than that. We should have gotten back a long time ago. I don't understand what's happening. When night fell, we picked up the pace. Michael stopped leaning on me and limped down the trail as fast as he could. He later said that the adrenaline dulled the pain and gave him motivation to continue. That part of Oregon is mountain lion country, and I'd just read about lion attacks a few weeks prior to our hike. Being caught out there in the dark was the absolute last thing we wanted. But there was nothing we could do about it. We were scared. Michael shined his phone light on the path to make sure that we didn't lose our footing, and I shined mine into the trees, scanning for cat eyes. I was crying. Fitbit said that we'd hiked 9 total miles. After 9.5, we finally saw the sign for the trailhead and scrambled toward it. Relief didn't completely wash over me, because I expected we'd have to hitchhike to where we started, or trudge along the side of the road for a few miles. There was simply no way this could have been the trailhead. It was 3 miles past what it should have been. As we climbed the short set of steps to the parking lot, sweaty, thirsty, exhausted, and completely unnerved, I hoped to see the car. My prayers were answered, but it was my car. We were at the same trailhead. For a moment, Michael and I were in shock, to be honest. Our fear and misery were replaced by sheer confusion, and we just stood there. Then a twig snapped somewhere in the woods behind us, and that broke the spell. We hurried across the parking lot, towards the car, and in those few seconds, I felt an intense dread. The best way I can describe it is the feeling you get in a nightmare when something is pursuing you and you're trying to run away, but moving in a slow motion, like your legs just won't cooperate, and you know that thing is chasing you and it's gonna catch up. This is the only time in my life that I've ever felt that way outside of a dream. We managed to pile into the car and peel out of the lot. I was shaking. Michael was rambling about time distortion and dehydration and how we must have lost our bearings somehow. We got out of that national forest and onto the highway, and it was a while before we encountered any other cars. I didn't fully relax until we made it back to civilization. Neither of us could figure out exactly what we experienced. Michael was on crutches for a few months, following that incident with his ankle, and it has never been the same. I still have that bone that I found, and I keep it in a box because it gives me bad vibes. When we go hiking these days, we stick to the crowded trails. Whatever happened that day, we do not want it to ever happen again. Now, if you made it to the end of this video, I wanted to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to go show some love and respect and give a massive shout out to Interscare for joining us. Trust me, this was definitely something else. I've been talking with him, and he is honestly like, he's just a fucking sweetheart. That's all that I can really say. Make sure to go check out his channel. He does a lot, and I mean a lot, of awesome content. I'll tell you right now, you'll be hooked within, like, now. But, massive shout out to him, and a huge thank you. His link will be in the description, along with mine, like my Twitter, Instagram, everything like that will be in there. If you liked what you heard, make sure to like, comment, and if you're new to this channel and you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe. We're doing nothing but growing. I've got a lot of content, a lot more coming. So also make sure to check out the channel member section on the channel, where I upload bloopers, extra stories, stuff like that. But other than that, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one. We just got Interscare on a fucking video. That's fucking wild. Okay, bye.